Hello. Actually, on my other channel, because it's procurement, we do strategic sourcing. I call my audience sorcerers, but I really don't do that on this channel, so I don't know what to call you. Hello, viewers. Thank you for watching this video. This week, I'm going to film myself building a computer. I have built several computers over the last couple of years. And in fact, I used to have a computer store in Berlin, New Jersey called Computer Joey. I'll flash the logo. I love that. I used to love that logo. Used to have a computer store, repair store. Before that, in college, I used to build all of my own PCs. Like, that was original generation PC building 20-something years ago. And I've kept up with it. I've built my own systems for the last, since I've used a computer. I recently just gave one of my 2015 build, I recently gave that to one of my buddies who moved in across the street. Hi, Rob. And I upgraded it a little bit, and he doesn't do much with computers, but he needed a computer. He needed a Windows PC. So he got that. My last PC, the PC I built after that one to replace the 2015 build, my son recently got that. I built a computer in 2023 over the summer, and I was contemplating recording that, but then once I started to get the parts, I just didn't do it. So for this one, I have most of the parts. I filmed some B-roll showing the parts, but I'm going to go through what I have, a general idea of what everything cost. I tried to build this machine, or I tried to buy the parts for this machine. I tried to do like a budget build, and it was kind of a fail. And I kind of want to use that failure as some talking points for everyone. So I had some parts left over from previous builds, and that kind of also spurred me to do this build with all of these spare parts. But again, I started to make some decisions during the selection process, which you will all laugh at me about. Let's get to it. The motherboard, an MSI B550-A PRO. The reason why I bought this, we got closer. The reason why I bought this motherboard was because it was cheap. This, I think, retails for $130 to $150. I got this for $80, and they threw in an SATA hard drive, which I am probably not going to use in the build. I was going to do it. It was 250 gigabytes, and I wanted something bigger for the secondary drive. But $80 motherboard, and this is an AMD supported motherboard, so it puts in an AMD 5000 chipset. So let's review that. This is the start of my cheap part selection failure. This is an AMD Ryzen 7 5700X, right? I keep saying 5600, but it is a 5700X. This 5700X I was able to purchase brand new on eBay for $150. There was a Ryzen 7 or a Ryzen 5 5600 flat. There was no letter underneath it that I could get for $130. And then there was like a Ryzen 5500, a Ryzen 5 5500 that was like $100. Once I made the decision, because I was initially going to buy the Ryzen 5 5600, this was $20 more. It had slightly better performance. Honestly, it wasn't a huge difference. But the additional thread count made me opt to spend the additional $20. I don't know if I will, I don't think I'm going to regret it, but again, I was trying to do this cheap, and this is the first example of where I failed. RAM, 32 gigabytes of 3200, was this a Corsair RAM. I've used this Corsair RAM in other builds before. I've never had an issue with it. It's not the fastest RAM by any means, but it was $64. So at $64, it was marginally more expensive than even like the cheap no-name brands. Maybe the cheap no-name brands for 32 gigs of RAM, maybe it was $58. So this was pretty cheap. I trust Corsair. I've used them on a lot of builds before, and especially back in the computer store. So I trust them, so I'm using it. Here's another example of my failure. The power supply. Good Lord, power supplies have gotten so complicated and expensive in these computer builds. My last build for my primary PC I struggled so much. It was the worst part to pick. You know, you don't want to put a bad power supply into your computer where might get fried and it's a pain in the ass to rewire them. So initially I was looking at a 650 watt bronze. I think it was a Be Quiet. I was looking at a couple of different things that fit the cases, but then this one was kind of on sale. It was 850 gold for $95. And you're going to see a common theme because there are a lot of Be Quiet parts that I'm using in this build. That was not intentional. They just must have been running a good sale over the last 2 weeks that I've been looking for parts. So 850 watts, this is a modular power supply and it is gold rated. It's had some pretty decent reviews on the internet, and again, I'm planning to give this PC to my son. I wanted something he can grow into, so I wanted a little bit more power in there in case I change the video card, which I'll get to next. Video cards are still ridiculously expensive. Like, ridiculously expensive. And I wanted something decent that can do at least 1080p gaming, and I didn't want to spend an arm and a leg. Wood actually had a sale for some NVIDIA. I think it was I don't even know. I think it was maybe a 30. It wasn't a 3050, but NVIDIA had, or Wood had some used NVIDIA graphics cards, but they were still over $200. And I was kind of like, for $200 for a used card that was 8 gigabytes of VRAM, is it worth it? So I opted to go with a new XFX 6600, an RX 6600. So this is an AMD video card, RX 6600. It's got 8 gigabytes of video RAM. This XFX brand, I'm rocking. All of my current builds have a version of an XFX. I have a my 2018 computer has an RX 5800. My primary machine has an RX 6950 right now, and this is a 6600. I spent $209 on this card, brand new. The Ryzen did not come with a CPU cooler, so I don't know if that's what made it somewhat cheaper, but I actually happen to have a brand new Noctua NH-U12S Chrome. It's been sitting in a box for 3 years in the house. So someone actually gifted it to me because I was complaining about how loud my 2018 build CPU fan was. So got this quiet one, but then I just didn't want to go through the aggravation of having to replace the CPU cooler. They always kind of freak me out, and then a lot of the times I didn't know if this came with the kit, so I actually bought the AM4 mounting kit for this for the motherboard. So kind of excited to use this. It's rated pretty well. There's a site you can check, but this one's rated pretty well for the Ryzen 7 5700X. So kind of excited to use this and doing a quiet build. I don't know what they call these chips. What are they, like an M.2 SSD drive? But I'm a big fan of not having to run SATA cables for the traditional drives, the smaller drives. So this is a chip. There's 2 slots on that motherboard for hard drives. I have a 1 terabyte for the operating system, and this is where, again, I changed my mind. Initially, I was going to use the freebie that came with the motherboard at 250 gigabytes as a spare drive. But if the plan is to install games on this for my son, that's not enough. And then I got a ridiculously good deal on Walmart for a 500 gigabyte drive. It's exactly the same drive, just 500 gigabytes. I think I got it for like $22 or $24. So I was going to go with that. But then just being on Reddit threads, everyone was kind of, you should probably go bigger. So I did order, and I don't have it yet. It's supposed to come later today. I did order a 2 terabyte. I think it's a Crucial. It's a Gen 3 2 terabyte drive for the video games. So that's where all the installs will go. So again, this is where cheap build fail. I've failed miserably on this one. And I think this one, I'll correct it here if I made a mistake. I think this terabyte drive was $60. And this was also a Walmart special. So Walmart had a couple of good sales on these parts. So, and it comes with a free game. So, you know, that helps. For the case, I also used a Be Quiet product. It is a 500DX. The other day, I got some Be Quiet fans. I'll get the box. I bought some additional case fans, and these are Be Quiet Shadow Wings 2, 120 millimeter fans. I bought 3 of these and I installed it in the front of the case. This case has a line down the middle for an RGB setup. It's got decent airflow. Apparently it's much better than the 500 base unit. So I read some reviews and it's got decent airflow, but having that line down the middle certainly does impact it. So I wanted to get 3 fans up front to really push the air through the system. It came with a 140, one 140 in the front, one 140 in the back, and one 140 at the top. I left the top and the back alone, but I took this one out. So I already did that work, so I already failed because there's pieces of what I did that I didn't record. Sorry. So that's really it for the parts. I also, when you get into these builds, sometimes you run into these situations where like the cables they're not long enough or they get stuck. I really ran into an issue, a pretty bad issue with my last build, my 2023 build with the power supply that I used. It was A-rated, it was A-tier rated. It was one of the few that was. I forget what it was. So I went for better quality, but the cables were really stiff and they were like flat ribbon cables. It was awful for the build. And I noticed that a lot of people use these extension cables. Asia Horse extension cables. I don't foresee using a lot of cables in this build. It's probably just going to be the one routing to the motherboard, the one going to the GPU, and then there's another one. I think there's 2 that go to the motherboard. There's one for the CPU. So there's CPU, there's a motherboard, and then there's the GPU one. I don't, because I have the 2 M2 hard drive, I don't think I'm going to even put an SATA cable in there, just to minimize the amount of cables in the system. So that's kind of hard for me because I always try to future-proof, but I don't think I would ever go back to a cabled hard drive. So that was a big reason why I also decided to do this build, because I was thinking about upgrading the 2015 build, and that motherboard doesn't support any of that stuff, and I just didn't want to spend the money into it. So yeah, these are all the parts. Like I said, I'm expecting a 2 terabyte hard drive, but that's about it. And I'm gonna start getting the motherboard prepped and getting the mounting bracket in for the CPU cooler. So I will start to record all of this stuff, and I will put the grand total. I want to say, because again, some of these parts I already had, but I did price them out. So I will put the grand total here. It's probably it's somewhere between $800 and $900. So not a cheap build. Not a cheap build. I'm sorry. I tried to go for cheap, and then I changed my mind halfway through because some of these parts I thought I got for good prices, and then I'm like, well, I don't want to half-ass some of these other pieces. So then I started going for quality. So cheap build fail. I apologize in advance if it's kind of awkward to film these videos with it's like an overhead shot, but I've seated the CPU, and again, this is a Ryzen 7 5700X. The other thing is I had to put mounting plates on for the CPU cooler. So I had to order a special kit because this thing's been sitting in a cabinet for a while. It did not have the appropriate mounting brackets for the Ryzen, for the AM4 chipset, for the Ryzen AM4 chipset. So the original unit comes with this backplate, but this wasn't necessary. So that is the original backplate. I didn't have to change it, and in fact, this one doesn't fit at all. So couldn't use that one. And the kit that I purchased, it was pretty cheap, but I had to purchase a retrofit kit for this to fit. So some of you may be curious about fan orientation. So this is the back. This is the back of the computer, right? And what's going to happen is the air is going to come this way, and that's what you want. You want the airflow, the cool air coming in. You want to place the fan, and the fan is going to be sucking the air in, the cool air. In fact, let me check the orientation on this. Yes. So air is going to come into the fan, into the case this way, This fan is sucking the air in and it's blowing it out. And then there's going to be in the fan that's in the back that's blowing it out. So it's going to pull the heat up and then push it this way. And then there's going to be a fan in the back of the case that'll suck the air out. So cool air in the front, pushing it out. This has to come off in order to mount it, in order to mount the fan. And it always freaks me out to have to take these off because I feel like I do it wrong every time. Just a reminder for myself. The label is facing inside the heat vent. So you want it to be perfectly black on the outside, right? Now, when it comes to thermal paste, you have different schools of thought, but this particular instructions say to just put a little dab in the middle. Let's look at that. I'll give you the exact instructions. Again, if you're a purist and you're like, oh no, it says applying too much thermal paste will lower the heat conductivity and cooling performance. Press a small drop, 4 to 5 millimeter diameter, into the center of the head to the heat spreader. The thermal grease will spread when it's placed down directly. And by the way, here's the bottom, right? Shiny surface. This is the worst part of building for me. I always get freaked out about putting the fan on. I'm always worried about cracking the CPU or doing something stupid. And, you know, they put the proper fear into you for this particular part of the build. And they recommend that you do a couple turns, like keep it even, keep the pressure even. Okay, that's all the way down. Don't over torque. Okay. CPU fan. All right, she's in. I've already made a mistake in one of my configuration selections. It's only got one slot for an internal hard drive. I thought it had multiple. It does not. So I am going to have to use an SATA hard drive, unfortunately. But chip is installed. CPU cooler is installed. It is plugged into CPU fan 1 slot. The RAM's going to go in, and it's going to go in slots 2 and 4. There's only one way the RAM can go in, and this is the wrong orientation, which you can't see anything anyway. I had it backwards. So the label. Okay. Click, click. This one is a bit of a bummer. I'm kind of pissed. I could have swore that I read that this thing had two slots. So that kind of sucks. Ruh-roh. I need to find a screw. Inside the motherboard box, there was these little tiny screws for the M.2 hard drive. They're so teeny tiny. I don't even know if this will focus. Oh, that is... Oh, it is magnetic. And I really need it to be, because I am... Jesus Christ, I can barely see this. There we go. Don't forget to take that off the heatsink. More plastic waste. How does this go in? hard drive in. So I had a holy crap moment with this camera. The last thing you probably saw was this thing dropping. So Sony ZV-1 with a very minimal small rig case, and I've been using these Anchorwork wireless microphones with this particular setup, and the Anchorwork receiver, the clip that holds it into the shoe mount kind of bent a little bit, but as a whole, I think this thing's working. Or you won't ever see this video because it's not working and I am not going to use it. But I kind of freaked out when it dropped, so I ended up finishing up the computer, the build, and I'm just going to show you some stuff, some things to think about and look out for with this build. Okay, so one of the things I highlighted, or I said when I was doing this build yesterday, was that there wasn't two M2 ports for the hard drive, but there is. This one's right here. It's between the PCI ports, and I didn't see it until I was like hands deep in the machine. So there are two ports. There's one that you're probably not going to be able to see. So some things to take note of. Let's go to the back of the case. This power supply was a kind of a nightmare to install. You have to take this cage out. So there's like a guard, and then you screw it into the guard, and then you slide it in. So you're not putting it in sideways. You're sliding it in. Because I have two M2 cables, or two M2 drive ports, I didn't have to use an SATA cable and power supply. So there really are only are three cables going into this machine, like power cables, besides like the fans and stuff. But let me show you this. There's ports right here. Well, there are slots to put cables up. I initially put the PCIe power cable. I tried to run it up this way, and it went in, but I couldn't get it out. Once I decided that this probably wasn't the right way to pull it up, once I decided that this wasn't a good spot to bring it up at, and I should go through this spot right here, and I did the same thing for the motherboard cable. Getting it out was a nightmare, and what was happening is when I was pulling out the cable, it was actually, see if this focuses, it was bending the pins when I was pulling it out. Now I was able to bend them back, but that was not fun at all. Let me give you another view on the inside. So I mentioned that I put three 120s in the front. Here's where they're at. You have to take out, there's a hard drive cage right there. You can take it out, slot the fan in, and put it back. CPU fan installed. This one was already in there. I didn't have to touch it. And this one I had to move ever so slightly in this direction. For the first time in a long time, I built a machine that it booted up instantaneously. And I didn't have any problems with it. I did update the BIOS and the firmware of the motherboard. A lot of people in the Reddit threads have been complaining about MSI firmware updates. This one seems to be fine. They didn't seem to have any major issues. It did actually perform a little bit better. You do have to change the profile. I guess I'll show that on screen in a second. But you do have to change the profile of the memory. So I have a 3200 speed. It defaulted to 2133. So you just immediately go into the BIOS. There's a profile. In the easy section, there's a profile. You just switch it to the one profile, and it picks up the right RAM speed. It's a pretty fairly easy fix. I don't even know if that's a fix. It's just a thing that you have to do. But everything else seemed to work just fine. One thing that maybe isn't working fine, I'm going to try it one last time. Let me see if I can show this. That cable right there, I think, is to power the LED lights in the front of the case. And for some reason, the lights aren't going on the case. So I'm trying to figure that out. That's why the case is open right now. Here is the BIOS screen, and you hit delete rapidly as the computer's booting up to get into it. And if you look here, you want to select the AXMP Profile 1, And when you do that, you'll get the appropriate RAM speed. So yeah, and then you just click the X at the top corner, click save, and when it reboots, if you want to check, it doesn't show you right away that the RAM has been updated, but when you reboot it, and go back into the BIOS, you'll see it. And there's another place you can check as well, which I'll show you. So if you want to check and see how your computer is registering your memory, left click on your taskbar and go into Task Manager. Click onto the Performance section. And then if you click on Memory, you'll see over here that the speed is 3200. So that's where you check it. And everything's working well, except for my RGB lights in the front, which I need to figure out why those are not turning on. More to come. All right, so it is 2 weeks later, and I've successfully built the machine, and I've implemented it in Ben's room, and I fixed the lighting issue, which I will show you in the B-roll. So I'm a little bit behind on this video, but overall, Ben, how are you enjoying it?
I'm enjoying it a lot.
Yeah. What do you like most about the machine?
Everything.
Like I said, the biggest issue that I was having at the end was the lighting, and ultimately the lighting, I needed to plug in a proper SATA power cable to the power supply. I needed to connect a cable that was inside the case to power the lights. So that was the issue with the lighting. And everything else, it was a relatively smooth build. You're shaking your head like you actually.
Yeah, I totally witnessed everything.
Hopefully this video was helpful to you, and thank you for watching. Take care.
Bye.